Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Deltex Medical Investor Presentation. Throughout this presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your question and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company review all questions submitted today and publish responses where it's appropriate to do so. These will be available via your Investor Meet Company dashboard, and we'll send you an email to notify you when they're ready for your review. I'd also like to remind you that this presentation is being recorded. Before we begin, we would like to submit the following poll, and if you could give that your kind attention, we would be most grateful. And I would now like to hand over to Andy Mears, CEO of Deltex Medical Group. Good afternoon, Andy.
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much. Yes, I am Andy Mears. I am Chief Exec of Deltex Medical. And this is our first presentation on Investor Meets Company. So I would like to start by just describing what we do, what our core technology is. So we manufacture the True Vue system. So this is a hemodynamic monitor. We use ultrasound to measure the patient's blood flow, as well as measuring the patient's blood pressure. And when we talk about hemodynamics, we're talking about the combination of the patient's blood flow, so their circulating blood volume, as well as their blood pressure, and then the factors that might influence their hemodynamics. And that could be anything from resistance to patient movement, anything that could change the circulating blood volume of the patient. So why is it so critical for us to measure the patient's hemodynamics? Well, we've proven through lots of randomized controlled trials that when you optimize the patient's circulating blood volume, either during surgery or in intensive care, then we significantly reduce the post-operative complications that can be associated with suboptimal hemodynamic management. So our core technology is the Doppler, the True Vue Doppler, and we have 24 randomized controlled trials that show that this device can reduce those avoidable complications, such as acute kidney injury and surgical site infections. It improves outcomes for patients because they move through the hospital quicker. You also get lower costs. And we've proven this in both the high-risk surgical patient and more recently into the low to moderate risk patients. And I think most importantly for the patient, it improves patient safety because it reduces these avoidable complications. I'd like to give you an overview of how we see the company will grow and what our key drivers are moving forward. We have three main key drivers, and our first one we see is the expanding market opportunity. So recently, we've seen increasing interest from major healthcare companies, resulting in sector-based consolidation. This leads to elevated marketing spend around hemodynamics, which is raising clinical awareness and ultimately will increase adoption. We're excited by the next generation of monitor, which we're targeting for release towards the end of the year. And within this new platform, we're also including a new non-invasive device. So much broader application, the ability to take us into other areas of the hospital that we currently don't sell into. And then within the current climate, we can see that hemodynamic monitoring will expand anyway. So the result of COVID-19 for us means a bigger intensive care business as ventilated COVID patients need hemodynamic monitoring. And then the very well publicized backlog of elective surgery. So here in the UK, at least 5 million people waiting for elective surgery. The second driver we see is based around improving patient outcomes, primarily for the reasons I've just talked about. So the huge backlog of elective surgery, the True Vue Doppler has been shown to significantly reduce injury to patients' vital organs after surgery. We help them through the hospital system quicker. We demonstrated these reduction in post-operative complications in 24 randomized trials. The most recent is in April in liver transplant patients. And we're also now seeing an emerging trend for the creation of curated data sets. This is where you're utilizing haemodynamic data to improve patient care through predictive algorithms. And the driver 3 is really about the evidence base and the economic benefits. So as well as the randomized control trials, we have more than 1,000 clinical publications showing outcome benefit related to the True Vue Doppler. What we're seeing across the globe, and especially here in Europe, are now changes to how medical devices are regulated. So MDR actually came into play yesterday, 26th of May, into Europe. And this is a higher medical regulation than previously, which was the Medical Device Directive. And the difference now with MDR is that new technologies need to submit clinical evidence that's specific to their own technology. So for many years, similar devices to the ODM and the True Vue Doppler have been submitting our evidence base as evidence that their similar technology may do the same thing. Well, now devices have to complete their own evidence. So we see this as a real positive for us and in the valuation of our evidence base. And we've had more than 1 million patients treated using True Vue Doppler. We know it's very safe as well as being very effective. I want to briefly touch on our P&L for 2020. Most people understand our revenues come primarily from elective surgery, which of course has been severely curtailed due to COVID-19. Approximately 80% of our revenue is from elective surgery. So planned surgery in the main markets we sell into. So no surprising then our revenues were considerably impacted last year. We had a total revenue of approximately 2.4 million versus 2019 where we were at 4.3 million. So huge challenges for us this year in our revenue number. Now we have managed to reduce some of our costs. The clear significant difference in our sales and distribution costs, and that's of course related to our sales and clinical teams primarily being based at home for the past year. So we have that reduction in overheads that's helped. We've also had a considerable amount of grant funding. We've done exceptionally well in submitting grants and winning those to help us develop the next generation of monitor, as well as some of the other interesting products we're working on. So that has really helped us reduce our actual spend in R&D as we've had these grants come into the company. So if you'd asked me at the beginning of 2020 if I thought the company would be in good shape, having lost almost half of its revenue over the period, I would have said, you're crazy. But when you look here at our adjusted EBITDA, which is one of our metrics for the company, we saw a negative of 200,000 EBITDA in 2020 compared to a positive of 400. So really challenging year for us, but we weathered it very well. And within that time, we've made none of our employees redundant. We have exactly the same headcount as we started at the beginning of the year. We've really protected our employees because we think it's very important as we come out of the pandemic to hit the ground running quickly. And to do that, it's vital that we have all of our key staff around us. So I think we weathered the storm very well last year. Our balance sheet is actually very clean. The biggest differences, obviously highlighted in red here, are related to the reduction in revenues. So the reductions around trade and other receivables, as well as payables, are the main differences on our balance sheet this year. And then when I look just briefly at the impact for COVID, so 80% of our business going into elective surgery, which has primarily been on hold for most of the year, meant that we had to focus into other areas of the business. Now, the True Vue Doppler was originally invented and used in intensive care here in the UK. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we focused quite heavily on the intensive care market. We installed more than 40 monitors into NHS hospitals, helping to support their frontline staff treating ventilated COVID patients. We also focus very heavily on accelerating this product development programs, and I'll go on and speak a bit on those later, as well as being very careful with our money, looking for cost reductions as well as operating efficiencies. So during the pandemic, the True Vue Doppler was used in many NHS hospitals as a vital tool to enable intensivists to accurately optimize the haemodynamics of ventilated COVID patients. Now, it's a small picture, I appreciate, on the screen, but circled there is the esophageal Doppler, the True Vue Doppler. And this picture was taken from a newsreel from BBC, where they went into University College London Hospital during the height of the pandemic and filmed the intensive care and how they were treating patients. And in most of those shots, you could see the cardio cue being used here. Now, this video was shown for probably around about 6 weeks and is still used as part of their archive footage of how to treat patients during COVID. Now, whilst we've seen a significant increase in our intensive care business when there has been patients within those intensive care, it's not large enough to counteract the effect of the cessation of elective surgery. But we do know, we do believe that once the pandemic is through and clear, we will have a bigger intensive care business because of that. Now, some of the challenges, and they still exist, are most hospitals are still closed to salespeople and clinical educators for the obvious reason of reducing footfall through hospitals. Now, that has driven us to invest significantly in improved digital training and marketing resources. So we've moved all of our training online. We've sponsored podcasts teaching on haemodynamics. So we've really tried to focus on how we reach our customers without being face-to-face. One of our main drivers we've associated is the consolidation within the market. So our closest competitor here in the UK is Lidco. Lidco were acquired at the beginning of 2021 by Massimo. Another close competitor was Cheetah Medical, who were acquired at the back end of 2019 by Baxter Healthcare. Prior to that, Pulsion and BMI were purchased by Getinge and Edwards Life Sciences, respectively. So what we can see now is 4 very large medtech companies investing significantly into the marketing programs and training programs around hemodynamic monitoring. And we absolutely believe that this is going to increase the size of the addressable market, as well as really help to address some of the adoption rates. And we clearly believe that that will have a big impact for us. So we can't talk about expanding market opportunity without the very well publicized elective surgery backlog. And there are a number of initiatives around the world where their healthcare systems are investing heavily to try to reduce this elective surgery backlog. Clearly, the key in getting patients in volume through surgery is to minimize the amount of time they spend in hospital. So again, we feel we're very well positioned here. We have a very, very significant evidence base that shows that we improve the patient outcome, which reduces the hospital length of stay, and also reduces the healthcare costs. That substantial backlog is going to take probably years, maybe 5 years to clear here just in the UK, and probably similar time periods across the world. So we see the real benefit for our technology as health systems really try to plan how to reduce that surgical backlog. I'd like to concentrate a little bit of time now on the product development programs. So our major product development is the next generation of monitor, the True Vue system, and that's targeted for release at the end of this year. It's easy to use, battery powered, greater portability, and hence we come to the market with a more clinically useful device with broader applications. We've been focusing a lot on patient haemodynamics and some of the combinations of blood pressure and blood flow. And we're the only device that can independently measure these. And there's some very nice data being presented on the combination of blood pressure and blood flow. And then we're also excited about the addition of the new non-invasive Doppler. So this new device is really taking for us to the next stage of going non-invasive. So our current device is used in intensive care and in the operating room, and that's used on patients who are sedated and anesthetized. So the patient isn't aware as this device is being placed into their esophagus. So the key for us is really now to take it to the next level and produce a reliable device that can be used really quickly and non-invasively. So we were lucky enough to win a R&D grant to help us support the development of this product. And that was work was done with the National Physics Laboratory. And they've really helped us design the probe head, the ultrasound probe head that has the maximum benefit of us being able to visualize this signal. So if I could just ask Mark in a moment to run a video. Before I do, I just want to give you the backdrop. So what you're going to see is the prototype of this device. The monitor you can see on the screen at the moment is the current monitor because we've developed the new device on the existing platform, so we know we can translate it into the new one. And the probe being used is this first prototype that has come from the National Physics Laboratory. My guinea pig for this example is our chairman, Nigel Keane. So what you will see is the video running. You will see Nigel's left ventricular output, so his circulating blood volume as it's pumped from the heart. And Nigel is getting this signal by placing the probe into the base of his neck. It's called the suprasternal notch, and he's visualizing using ultrasound his ascending aorta. So Mark, if you could please play that video. So, what the good news here is, the immediate good news is our chairman is as fit as a horse. He has a fantastic cardiac output, gained the signal in just a few moments. So from our perspective, when we think about triaging patients, this is a quick and easy way for us to demonstrate whether the patient needs further advanced hemodynamic monitoring as they go through their hospital journey. And that device is being launched into the new platform towards the end of the year. As well as working on new developments, we've also been concentrating on our existing offer. So currently, as I explained earlier on, the esophageal Doppler probe passes into the patient through the nose or through the mouth, and we measure descending aortic blood flow. The picture you can see is a probe head that is broken down to component level. And again, we were working with the National Physics Laboratory to really try to improve our beam width on this ultrasound device. And they have come up with a novel idea, which is designing lenses to go over the top of these ultrasound crystals. So in that picture, you can see a reversed TX and RX. T stands for transmit, R for receive. So those crystals have got a lens placed over the top of them, and they widen the bandwidth of our ultrasound signal, making it easier for us to obtain and find the signal. We have prototypes in production now, and we hope to go into mass production of those during the first half of next year. As well as some of the really advanced work we're doing, we're also going back to basics and thinking about some of the more simple things that could help us with our existing device. One of the limitations can be when a patient is in intensive care or having surgery is movement to the patient. This could be the surgeon or the nurse physically moving the patient. And When the patient gets moved, sometimes our probe moves with it and we can lose our signal. So again, we had another small grant to allow us to put out to design houses how we could improve that. And we have a design of a simple probe clip that anchors onto the ET tube. So this is the airway management of the patient. So it's a physical anchor that keeps the probe in place once it's been focused. This is also targeted for release early next year. And then at the beginning, I talked about these curated data sets. Now, we know not just in healthcare, but around the world, data is becoming more and more important. Now, the True Vue Doppler generates extremely precise hemodynamic data, and we do it on a beat-to-beat basis. So every time your heart beats, we collect absolutely all of the hemodynamic data related to that. And from that data, we can then look at creating these data sets that could be used in artificial intelligence and cloud-based hemodynamic algorithms. And the absolute vital element in creating these cloud-based systems is to use a device that has the ability to really generate that data with the accurate precision. And we know from the evidence base that ours has that requisite to create that really, really good data. Now, a couple of our competitors are already doing this. So if you think about the process from our perspective, we have the device that can collect that really raw hemodynamic data at source. We would then create these data sets, which would then be used as a reference point in designing some predictive models that would then go into the cloud and be used to improve patient quality of care. So these kind of hemodynamic data sets are really the future of how we see monitoring probably in the next 10 years or so. Cloud-based, predicting events before they happen, and we're very well positioned to benefit from that. As I mentioned earlier, changing regulatory environment that does impact us in a positive and sometimes negative way. So the big two changes for us, and I mentioned earlier on, is the transition from MDD to MDR, and that's based around technologies needing to validate their own technologies and not use evidence from other technologies. And then we also see some regulatory changes as a result of the UK leaving the EU. So the UK is going to have its own dedicated regulatory system. It will be called the UK CA mark. So us and all other medical device companies will be working towards getting that CA mark. But we also obviously need to sell continuously into Europe. And to do that, we therefore have to go through lots of regulatory changes to ensure that happens. One of the main ones is moving our notified body into Europe. We've completed all that work, and there have been some teething problems for sure, but we're very well positioned now to continue selling into Europe and don't see any issues going forward. I think it's worth touching on the value of our evidence base and the value, therefore, of the company. Those 24 randomized controlled trials have been amassed over the past 25 years. And randomized controlled trials are very expensive and also very time-consuming to complete. A multi-center randomized controlled trial can take now up to 5 years to publish, cost more than 6 figures in total for the work to be completed. And of course, there's no guarantees at the end of it that you'll get the positive result needed. So therefore, we see our evidence base is a very valuable asset to the company. And this is no more so defined by these changes to the regulatory filings, where historically other companies have said that Deltex has essentially proved the evidence base for hemodynamic monitor. We make a hemodynamic monitor. We use Deltex Medical's evidence, therefore, to validate our own technology. That's not going to happen anymore under MDR, and companies need to go away and conduct their own evidence. So we see that as a real plus for the company, and also really helpful in the valuation of our evidence base. Briefly touch on our main markets. So our main focus market is the US. It is a very large market with the highest average selling point that we sell to globally. We see hospitals there are probably more prepared to invest in the short term to save money in the future. And because of the way the health system works, there is a greater focus on cost savings, reducing complications, reducing length of stay are all very much at the forefront of people's minds. We also see that the Biden administration hopefully will result in more investment into US healthcare. So we're positive about the US, and currently both the US and the UK appear to bring COVID under control. And this is mainly due to very good vaccination programs in each country. We would expect the US to resume elective surgery at meaningful levels quicker than most other countries around the world, because that's the way the health system works. It's incentivized to move very quickly. In the UK, we currently see elective surgery resuming at around about 70% capacity now as we come out of the pandemic. We have, as I mentioned earlier, established a bigger intensive care business, and as we move into the winter, we get a better understanding of what that actually looks like. But we saw significant growth in intensive care during the pandemic when patients were in intensive care. We expect to see that business remain, whether it's pandemic patients or just general intensive care patients. The international markets, well, as you can imagine, they're all at very different levels. Some of our distributors are still selling into markets which are in the midst of yet another wave. But even so, we're seeing some positive activity from some of our other main distributors, and that's resulted in significant growth. The main distributor for us is France, as well as bouncing back reasonably well so far from COVID in elective surgery. We have also got past some of the issues I've covered in previous meetings related to a tender. So France has now started ordering on a regular basis, which is clearly very good for the business. For all of our territories, it's all about how they address the elective surgery backlog. And of course, each territory will come back at a different point in time. I'd like to briefly cover the changes to the board. So Duncan Nicol retired on the 31st of December as a non-exec director. And we're very happy that Tim Irish has joined the board from January. Tim is currently vice chair of NICE, has very good links through both industry and through the NHS, and we're all enjoying working with Tim at the moment. David is retiring today. We'd like to pass on our thanks to David. David rejoined Deltex as finance director in 2018-19. For the past 18 months, David has really helped us navigate this very challenging time for us. And we thank David for all his hard work, as well as his positivity, which is always fantastic to work with. We wish David a very happy retirement. I'm also very happy to announce David's replacement, who is Natalie Wetler. Natalie was up until today our financial controller. Natalie joined in 2011 before leaving in 2016 and then being lured back into the company in 2020. Natalie has a fantastic understanding of our finance system, and she's an absolute pleasure to work with. So I am going to enjoy working alongside Natalie as we grow the company moving forward. So just briefly, in my last few slides, cover the tailwinds, the headwinds, and let's put a conclusion to this presentation. So the positives we absolutely see coming through this year and into next year is around the increasing size of the addressable market due to the sector-based consolidation. We're looking forward to the next generation of device being released. For us, this will, in the short term, mean a significant increase in our capital sales especially in the replacement area of the business. Excited also by the new non-invasive Doppler, which is going to take us to new areas within the hospital, and ultimately it will take us outside of the hospital into GP surgeries, into sports medicine, ultimately potentially into military way down the line. We can see an expanded business as a result of intensive care growing from COVID-19. We can see that there's a significant backlog of elective surgery, so lost revenues will be recouped at some point over the next 4 to 5 years as we catch up on all of those patients. And then we're buoyed by the fact that the regulatory changes and this increased focus on data is increasing the value of our evidence base. So I can't talk about tailwinds without headwinds, and most of those, understandably, are still revolving around COVID. Ongoing delays globally to elective surgery as a result of COVID. We're seeing in some countries anesthesia capital purchasing decisions being delayed as their operating rooms are not running, so therefore they're not making those decisions. The restricted access to hospitals for our sales and clinical teams. Now in the US, our clinical teams are now back into the hospitals, which is very good. Here in the UK, access is still very restricted. For us as a business, there's obviously 2 areas. We need face-to-face contact with doctors to provide ongoing training. Clearly, there are doctors who are experienced with the device, but to grow the business, we need to train lots who aren't, as well as create pipeline going forward. We can only do that if we can get into hospitals and carry out evaluations of the technology. So we do need restricted access to be curtailed and for our sales team to get back into the hospitals as soon as possible. Then, of course, there's a dreaded 3rd wave here in the UK and the impact that would have. Then the impact from COVID on our release of the next generation device. And that's in 3 areas, really. Internally, we're hitting our deadlines, but we get to a point fairly soon where a lot of external work needs to be done. And that's external testing, safety testing, emissions testing. So the availability of test houses to both test and retest if necessary. We're seeing supply chain pressures, and I think all of industry is seeing this. Lots of different products, shortages caused by the pandemic and lockdowns. There's a specific shortage around silicon at the moment, and that makes it more challenging for us as we finalize the design of the device. And in several instances, we've had to redesign the device to choose a component that is available at the moment rather than choosing one that's currently out of stock without having a clear indication of how long that will take for stocks to be replenished. And then the actual physical regulatory approvals requires MD auditors to come on site. They come down to our Chichester office and they go through our technical files. So just wrapping up then, the conclusion really is the True Vue Doppler technology and system. We absolutely tick all the boxes. We reduce hospital length of stay, we improve clinical outcomes whilst reducing healthcare costs. The new device will be a really exciting time for us and will help us with the commercial positioning. The board is very clear that as soon as we are out of the current pandemic, we will start to grow the company quite quickly. The consolidation in the industry is interesting. We can see that market will increase with higher adoption rates, and we will benefit from that as the market grows. H1, expect, as we've seen through 2020, still heavily impacted by COVID, but we're excited as soon as we get into H2 through summer, and we will start to show significant increases in the NHS and UK to sit alongside the growth that we're currently seeing in international. So thank you for your time and listening to that. I would like to pass back to Mark and then move on to some questions.
That's brilliant, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the company take a few moments to review investor questions submitted already, I'd like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your Investor Meet company dashboard. I'd also like to remind you that your feedback is important to the company, and immediately after the presentation has ended, you'll be redirected for the opportunity to provide feedback in order that the company can better understand your views and expectations. Andy, I know I haven't given you an awful lot of time, but you had a number of pre-submitted questions, and of course on the Q&A tab you can see investors have been submitting questions throughout your presentation. Is it possible I could just hand back to you and remind you just to read out the questions, of course, and give a response where it's appropriate to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I'll do is I'll start with a finance question because I'd like to introduce Natalie. So one of the pre-submitted ones that we had was how is the COVID-19 pandemic impacting gross margins? So I'd really like Natalie to say hello to everybody and answer that question. While she's doing that, I will read through some of the other notes and then you can come back to me.
Hi everyone, I'm Natalie. Really pleased to see you all today. That's a really good question. So the continuing effect of COVID and the cessation of elective surgery is having an impact on our gross margins. Our production activity levels are at much lower levels at the moment, yet we're still incurring our fixed production overhead costs. We are mitigating this, however, by taking advantage of the government furlough scheme for our production personnel. However, the reporting of this furlough funding is actually classed as other operating income rather than being netted off directly from cost of sales. So this obviously isn't being seen, the effect of this isn't being seen in our gross margin. We expect through the course of H1 that production will still be at lower levels. However, we will continue to access the furlough funding. As we go into H2, we do expect production to increase and therefore our gross margin will actually increase in line with that activity. Thank you. We do expect.
We're just waiting for Andy just to reconnect momentarily. If you could bear with us, and Andy will reconnect very shortly, and then we'll carry on with the Q&A. Hi, Andy.
Hi there. I think there was maybe a little bit of breakup in Natalie's.
Yeah, Natalie's fine. All audio was good. We just lost you momentarily. So if I can just hand back to you just for the time being, Andy, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem. So I am reading through the questions and I can see there's maybe 2 or 3 on here related to France. So perhaps I could pick all of them up in one go. So this is Ramnik and Andrew, both interested in France. So let me just touch on France. So the question is Brexit impacting us and are we seeing most of our growth come through France? So the answer to the Brexit question is, thankfully, France for us isn't one of the countries that we've had any great issues importing into. So the good news is that no issues for us in France in shipping, and we have finally resolved, as I think I alluded to in the presentation, some of the problems we had in a tender that we won 2.5 years ago, where we had to decommission all the equipment that caused the first half of this year, and I expect them to continue to do that. Still impacted to a certain extent in the same way that most, so it's at lower levels than pre-pandemic, but it's really good to see regular monthly orders from France, and that will clearly help us with some almost natural growth coming through from the international market, which is a little bit outside of COVID. Let me just pick up on a couple of other ones while I'm here.
Andy, may I just suggest that we just keep the cameras off? I'm just noting
yes, struggled in the same way other countries have.
Sorry, Andy, if I could just interrupt, just if I could ask you to turn your camera off, just to conserve your bandwidth. There's just a noticeable drop. If I just turn your camera off, that would just make sure your audio is a lot more crisper. So thank you once again. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, no problem. So just talking about the US business is in the same way as everywhere else it has been impacted. So for a large period of times, people could not get into accounts and elective surgery has been delayed. Now we have seen in the first half of this year peaks and troughs. So we suddenly have a couple of good months in the US and then localized outbreaks, meaning the hospitals restrict access to people, restrict elective surgery. And so I still see that, just like the UK, probably going on into the beginning of H2. But as I say, I do see the US bouncing back quickly. One of the questions there was related to Brigham and Women's, which is one of the accounts that we have continued to be able to go into and do training. So that's gone to plan.
Andy, just while you take over the next question, if I could just ask the boardroom to turn off the camera as well, that will also help with the broadband. So if you just turn that camera off as well, that's brilliant. Thank you once again, and sorry to interrupt, Andy. Back to you.
Yeah, no problem. There's a good question from Andrew C. The question being, could you say a little bit about what industry thinks of the Doppler method? Do they recognize it as very effective? And do you think other players will launch something similar? So I think the Doppler method is very highly regarded in industry. And the reason for this is because the evidence base. So we hold probably 90% of the evidence base for hemodynamic monitoring, the positive evidence. So it's very difficult for the industry not to recognize that. So when I say we're recognized as a gold standard, for most new technologies, the first thing they want to do in coming onto the market is evaluate themselves against us, for that reason of saying, well, we're similar, therefore the evidence base that Doppler has, we can therefore apply it to ourselves. Now, will anybody launch anything similar? The question is, why would they want to? The time it would take for them to design and then to create evidence base, I would say probably not. Will people continue to find different ways of doing it? I think absolutely. But until they can actually come up with a significant evidence base to support it, then I think they will struggle in the same way that most of the other companies currently do. There was a question, a pre-submitted one, just talking about the view on how quickly the UK will return to elective surgery. And I was hoping Nigel would perhaps answer this one and say hello to the investors. If Mark, could you pass me over to Nigel?
Yep, Nigel's in the room, sir.
Okay, well, welcome everybody, and I'm glad to be able to talk to you to show that I actually am alive and I'm not just a video. As some of you know, not only do I work with Deltex, but I also chair a number of other medical activities. In particular, I chair a thing called the Oxford Academic Health Science Network, where we have a network of hospitals all around the Oxfordshire, Berkshire, Bedfordshire and Buckinghamshire region. And so I have quite a good insight into what is happening in those regional hospitals, and everybody's moving really hard to move back into elective surgery. They're by and large, they're dividing their hospitals into COVID streams and non-COVID streams. As we've seen, the government has a target to get back to 80% of the elective surgical levels as we get into the year. So it is happening. It's very complex for the hospitals. They have to be more careful in their routines. They've got a workforce that has worked extremely hard to support everybody over the last 18 months or so, which they're bringing back into play with their prime requirement of looking after very sick patients. So certainly is happening. and steadily happening. And I think we will see our business continuing to benefit from that resurgence of activity as we go through the year.
Back over to you now, Andy. Thank you.
Well, I've read through the remaining questions, and I think what I would do is try and answer as many of them as I can post-meeting. Perhaps I'll touch on the last one, and then I think we need to go because we have a board meeting starting shortly. Looking down, Andrew asked, could I comment on the takeover of Lidco and the relevance for Deltex? And this has been voted up, so more than one person is interested in this. I can give you my opinion. I absolutely believe at the moment that the hemodynamic monitoring market is potentially a very good one. There are lots of companies who could be interested and are interested. The Lidco acquisition happened quite quickly. Massimo, who are the acquirers of Lidco, were quite quick in and dealing with Lidco. And for me, it just really demonstrates that for many years, we and other companies have been really grinding away at hemodynamics. And at some point in the future, clearly the market will grow significantly enough to attract lots of other interested parties. As we continue, we focus very hard on growing Deltex's business. So it's good from a perspective of growing the market because the market will increase and we will grow with it. So I only see it as a positive.
Andy, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. I know investor feedback's important to you, Andy, and we'll shortly redirect investors to do so. Perhaps ahead of that, I could just ask you for a few closing comments, and then, as I say, I'll redirect investors.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody for listening in today. I think we have a great set of investors, always very engaged. I know many of you personally, and I think it's always interesting to have conversations about the future of Doppler. So, I would like to thank the investor community for being, as always, very positive about us. And yeah, look forward to a very positive H2.
Andy, thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, could I ask you not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, and I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of Deltex Medical Group PLC, we'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session. Good afternoon to you all.
Thank you, Mark.